All right, so we're going to go ahead and go into how to solve density problems. Before that, I'm going to break down, to give you kind of a quick definition again of what is density, and we'll go over the equation. Okay, so we should know that density is just the amount of matter. It's just the amount of matter, you can say mass, in a given space, okay, or per volume rather. So per volume. Okay, so let's go ahead and go into the equation, and we're going to go ahead and break it down. Okay, so density, the density of any object is going to be equal to, our density is equal to the mass, in other words, the amount of matter in that object, divided by the volume of that object. Okay? Typically, we are going to be using, for mass, we're going to be using the units grams, and for volume, we're going to be using the units milliliters. Okay? So, because we're dividing grams per milliliters, the units for density are going to be grams divided by milliliters. Okay, grams divided by milliliters. Or another unit that you might also see grams per centimeters cubed. Okay, and the reason you often see these interchanged is because 1 milliliter equals 1 centimeter cubed. So they're essentially the same. Okay, all right. So now that's the equation. We don't write this like this. We write it just as density equals mass divided by volume, just the symbols. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and show you how to rearrange and solve for different things. Okay. So kind of the second skill you need to be able to do is you need to be able to rearrange the equation that's up here. Okay. In other words, solve for mass and solve for volume. We're not only solving for density. So I know density equals mass divided by volume. If I want to solve, let's say I want to solve for mass, right? Well, if I'm solving for mass, then that means I need to get mass by itself on one side. Well, what do we have on this side? We have volume. So I need to get rid of that and put that on the other side. So what's the opposite of divide by volume? Because this symbol here means division. Well, the opposite would be multiply. So I get rid of it by doing the opposite. So I go times V. If I do it to one side, I have to do it to the other side. Times V. Things that are across canceled. Same thing, like when we're doing conversion, same thing here, right? So if I'm looking for mass, my equation is mass equals volume times density. Okay? So I just rewrote this. I took this and put that there. Okay. Now, let's say I want to solve for, we'll start all over again with the same equation. Let's say I want to solve for volume. Well, if I want to solve for volume, first I want to get rid of this fraction. So I'm going to do the same thing that I just did. So times V times V. This cancels, right? That leaves me with V times D equals M. Well, how do I get V by itself? Well, I want to get density on the other side. So in other words, I want to go divide by density, because that's the opposite of multiply. And that gives me my equation. Volume equals mass divided by density. Okay, so these are my three equations that you're going to be using. Here, and our density one. Okay, and you don't have to memorize them, you just have to be able to plug in and move them around and solve for them. So really you only want to memorize one. You want to memorize that one, but I just wanted to show you guys how we move things around. Okay, all right, let's go on to volume. So often when you do problems, you're going to be given mass, but you sometimes have to figure out the volume. So let's figure out a few things. In other words, a few kind of things you might see. So let's say I have a rectangular object here. Okay, and try my best to do this. Let's say this object has a width, this object has a height, and it has a length, right? If I want to find my volume, well, my volume is just length times width times height. Okay, in other words, let's say this is 2 centimeters, this is 3 centimeters, and this is 5 centimeters. My volume would equal my length, which is 5, times, I'm going to take off, I'm not going to put the units yet, times my width, which was 3, times my height, which was 2. Okay? This is just 5 times 3 is 15. 15 times 2 is 30. Okay? What are my units, though? I went centimeters times centimeters times centimeters, so that's just centimeters to the third power. Okay? And we're gonna need this information. That's why I'm bringing this up before we actually start doing the problems. Okay. Next thing I wanted to bring up is if you ever see a cube, remember cube, all the sides are the same. So for example, if it tells you that the side of a cube is 2, then that means this side is 2, this side is 2, and this side is 2. In other words, my volume is equal to whatever the side of something, however big the side is, to the third power. Okay, so side, or you can think about it as width to the third power, however you want to think about it. But for example, in this example, it would just be 2 times 2 times 2. Let's say these are centimeters, so my volume would just be 2 times 2, which is 4, times 2, 8 centimeters cubed. Okay, same thing as this, is just that all the sides are the same. Okay. Another way, and something else that you might also see is you might have to find the mass of an irregular object. So let's say I have a graduated cylinder here. Okay, it's just a container with water, and then it reads 10 milliliters. Okay. Well, let's say I put an object, a weird shaped object that's shaped like this, right? It's not easy to calculate the volume. Let's say I put this in here, and then after I put this object in here, that water rises, and now it reads 17 milliliters, right? That's when the object is in there. Okay, now I need to find the volume of this object. The volume is just going to equal how much the water went up. In other words, my volume equals my final, take away my initial. Because if I take them away, if I take the final volume, take away the initial volume, it's going to tell me how much it went up, right? So my volume would be 17, take away my initial, which was 10. Initial just means my starting one. My volume would be 17 milliliters. Okay? All right, a couple other key things that you want to know before we start our practice problems is, one, the density of water. So the density of water is equal to 1 gram per milliliters. Okay, so just kind of like a keynote that I want you guys to know. And if something has a density that is less, then it will float. If the density is greater, it will sink. Okay? And then, last of all, I want you to understand that the density is a property of a material, meaning that doesn't change. If my material doesn't change, my density doesn't change because it's a property of it. So in other words, if I keep the same material, then I'm going to have the same density. Okay, that doesn't change. So I can identify unknown substances by knowing the density because that's always going to be the same. Okay, so let's go ahead and go, using all this information that we've just gone over, we're going to go ahead and do actual practice problems now. Okay? Alright, so here's the first problem. The first problem tells me to calculate the density of sulfuric acid if 1.4 liters of acid has a mass of 2,030 grams. Okay? If you notice, I could just plug it in and go mass divided by volume. This is my volume because it's in liters. However, I can't do that because my density is always in grams per milliliter. Okay? So this is good, but this has to be converted into milliliters. And that's where the conversions come in. So we know that 1,000 milliliters equals 1 liter. So let's convert this. So I'm going to go ahead and convert this here. So I'm going to go 1 Just write this here. 1.4 liters times 1 liter goes in the bottom. 1,000 milliliters goes on top. Okay, equals, that just equals 1,400 milliliters. Okay, now the rest is kind of simple. We just plug it in. So we'll just plug it into the equation. Density equals mass, which is 1230 grams, divided by my volume, which is 1,400 milliliters. Okay, so then we just divided this divided by this is going to give us our answer. So 12,030 divided by 1,400 equals 0.878. Okay, I'm just going to round to the first decimal. Since that's 7, we round up. So our answer is going to be 0.9. Getting rounding to that first one. What are our units? Well, it was grams per milliliters. So grams per milliliters. So remember, that is our units for density. Okay, I'll let you know when you would be using the other one. All right, let's go ahead and go on to another problem. Second problem says find the mass of 250 milliliters of benzene. Okay, so our units are good there. The density of benzene is 0.8765 grams per milliliter. All right, so in this case, I want to find the mass. So it's a problem that it's important that you look through your problems and you try to figure out what you need to find. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to plug these in and then we'll solve for whatever we're missing. Okay, so my density is this. So I'm not going to put D, I'm going to put density. So I'm going to put 0.8765, right? I'm going to leave out the units right now. Equals mass. I don't know the mass I'm looking for, so I just put mass, okay? Divided by my volume, which is 250, okay? All right, so remember, when I'm looking for mass, I need to get this to the other side. So what's the opposite of divided by 250? Multiply by 250. Multiply, multiply. Okay, whatever I do to one side, I got to do to the other side. These cancel because they're across from each other and they're the same. So my mass equals this times this. Okay, in other words, my mass will equal 250 times 0.8765. Okay, round to the first decimal. It's going to be 219.1. So my mass equals 219.1. Okay, now the last part is, what are my units? Okay, so if you notice, I didn't put in the units there, but if I were to have put the units, this would have been milliliters, and this would have been grams per milliliters. Okay, so because milliliters and milliliters were being multiplied and they were across from each other, they would cancel and we would be left with grams. Okay, but the reason I didn't put the units is because you don't need to do this necessarily. Okay, you just have to understand that, well, mass, that's measured in grams, so the answer is grams. If it was volume, then it would be milliliters, but it's not. So you just put grams. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and go on to the next problem here. Second problem, what is the mass of ethanol alcohol that fills a 200, actually we're going to go ahead and skip this one because this is the same one as the top, but we're going to do this one last, okay? We're going to go ahead and do problem number 4. So number 4 says, a rectangular block of copper metal weighs 1,896 grams. The dimensions of the block are 8.4 centimeters by 5.5 by 4.6. From this data, what is the density of the copper? We're still trying, so in this problem, we're trying to figure out density. To figure out density, I need to know two things. I need to know my mass, and I need to know my volume. Well, I know my mass. My mass is, and even though it says weight, some problems might say that. Weight and mass are slightly different, but we know it's mass because it has grams. Okay, so my mass is 1,896 grams. So I know that. So my density equals 1,896 grams. However, I don't know my volume, but I can figure it out because I've been given the dimensions of that object. Okay? In other words, I can find my volume by multiplying my length, my width, and my height. So I just go ahead and I multiply them. So my volume, I'm going to do it here on the side. My volume would equal 8.4. I'm going to leave out the units right now. Times 5.5 times 4.6. Okay? Just go ahead and multiply all those. 8.4 times 5.5 times 4.6 would give us 212.5 if I round to the first decimal. So my volume equals 212.5. Okay? What are my units? Well, I just want centimeters times centimeters times centimeters, so it's centimeters cubed. Okay? So I'm not done. I got to plug this number into my volume. So I'm just going to take this number, put it down there, centimeters cubed. Okay? That's a 3 there. All right, so now I go ahead and I just use my calculator, so I divide them. Same thing as the first problem. I was just dividing them. Okay? So 1896 divided by 12.5 gives me 8.922. That's a 2, so it just stays there. If I round to the first decimal, it would be 8.9. So my density equals 8.9. Okay, what are my units? Well, my units will be, they're not going to be grams per milliliter this time because this was centimeters cubed. They're grams per centimeter cubed. Okay? All right, I'll briefly go over how to do this third problem, but it's the same as the problem above. Okay? So in this problem, we are given our density and we are given our volume. Okay? We know mass equals volume times density, so all I would have to do is I would multiply them. And my answer would be in grams because I am looking for mass. Okay?